The earth trembles first, a low rolling thunder across the endless plains, not the storm but hoofs, thousands of them surging like a dark tide across the Eurasian steppe. Dust billows into the sky, choking the sun, turning day into a smoky twilight. Behind the thunder comes the fire, the crackle of thatched roofs collapsing, the scream of women clutching their children, the metallic hiss of blades cutting through air and flesh. From the edge of a burning village, a girl no older than 15 watches through the veil of smoke. She cannot see their faces, only the silhouette of riders cloaked in furs, their banners snapping like whips in the wind. The smell of scorched grain mixes with the copper tang of blood, flooding her lungs, making her tremble. These are not raiders from a neighbouring tribe. These are the horsemen of the Golden Horde, the empire that devours without mercy. To her, they are monsters out of legend. To the world, they are history's most feared conquerors. But beneath the clash of steel and the smoke of burning cities lies another truth, one rarely spoken in chronicles, but etched into the bodies of those they captured. Before we open the doors to this forbidden chamber of history, if you're drawn to the truths others dare not speak, subscribe, because what follows will change the way you see the Mongols forever. The Golden Horde was more than an army. It was a machine of power, built on discipline, hierarchy, and a code that valued loyalty to the Khan above all else. Their conquests stitched together half the known world, from the icy forests of Rus to the markets of Baghdad. And yet, the Empire's shadow extended far beyond politics and war. For when the fires of conquest dimmed, when swords were sheathed, and the cries of battle faded, another form of dominance began. One that unfolded not on battlefields, but in the intimate hidden chambers of their encampments. Captives, women and girls taken from villages like the one burning before us, were swept into a world where their bodies became instruments of negotiation, tools of diplomacy, or trophies of domination. Here, intimacy was stripped of tenderness and transformed into another weapon of empire. But this is not a simple tale of cruelty. For the Mongol Golden Horde lived in a paradox. Noble women of the ruling clans commanded immense influence, shaping politics from the shadows of the Khan's tent. They could broker marriages, control succession, and even command armies. Yet at the very same time, countless foreign women, Slavic, Persian, Chinese, were reduced to concubines, gifts, or spoils, stripped not only of their homes but of their identities. The steppe wind carried two truths at once: the empowerment of some, the utter destruction of others. And in this cruel duality, the Golden Horde's sexual customs were forged, not as mere indulgences, but as calculated strategies of control. Imagine, for a moment, the psychological power this wielded, to conquer not only the land, but the very bloodlines of those subdued, to ensure that children born of conquest carried Mongol blood, while the vanquished bore in silence the memory of their violation. This was not chaos. It was systematized. It was deliberate. It was another face of empire, yet what remains most haunting is not the brutality itself, but the silence of the records. For where chroniclers wrote in detail of battles, sieges, and treaties, they wrote in whispers, or not at all, of what happened after the flames died down. The truth survived instead in fragments, in travel accounts, in folklore, in the bones uncovered from mass graves, each fragment hinting at a shadowed reality far darker than the chronicles dared to reveal. And it is into this darkness that we must now descend, because the Golden Horde's power was not only measured in cities razed, but in the intimate dominion they held over the conquered, a dominion that blurred the line between private life and political weapon, between marriage bed and battlefield. But what happened to the women taken as spoils of conquest, when swords were sheathed and silence returned? Silence follows the raid, but it is not peace. For the women spared the sword, another fate awaited, a different kind of battlefield, hidden within the felt walls of Mongol encampments. The Golden Horde did not leave such matters to chance. Their harems were not places of indulgence, but institutions, regulated, stratified, and infused with the same ruthless logic that governed their empire. At their centre stood the wives of noble blood, chosen from within the Borjigin clan or allied families. These women wielded power beyond the imagination of most medieval queens. They advised khans, oversaw commerce, and in times of succession crisis, it was often their voices that determined who wore the crown. Yet surrounding them were the concubines, captives taken from battlefields stretching from the forests of Rus to the palaces of Persia. They were not courtesans by choice. They were human trophies, bargaining chips, and living symbols of Mongol supremacy. Imagine the terror of a Slavic maiden, torn from her burning village, thrust into a tent heavy with incense and furs, made to kneel before a Khan who saw her not as a bride, but as a token of conquest. Her first night was not a union. It was a ritualized deflowering, overseen in silence by servants, a grim act not of passion, but of ceremony. Through her body, the Khan reaffirmed his dominion, and through her womb, his bloodline would extend. This was not mere cruelty. It was policy. Women became instruments of diplomacy. A Persian concubine might be sent as a gift to a favoured ally, her very presence sealing a treaty. A Chinese beauty might be paraded at court as a sign of cultural submission. Even noble marriages were strategic. Daughters of Mongol rulers were offered to foreign princes, but always with a hidden leash. For when a Khan gave his daughter in marriage, he demanded tribute, military service, and absolute loyalty in return. Thus, the bedchamber became as political as the battlefield. Every union was a negotiation, every intimacy a transaction. Even the most private act became a public declaration of power. And yet, within this system, Mongol noblewomen stood apart. Unlike their counterparts in Europe, they were not cloistered or silenced. They could own property, command armies, and dictate the fate of Khans. Some even used the harem system to expand their own influence, surrounding themselves with attendants and handmaidens taken from conquered peoples. For these women, power was inherited not only through birth, but cultivated through the careful management of the very system that oppressed others. This paradox made the Golden Horde unlike any other medieval power. On one side of the tent wall, the noble consort cloaked in jewels, whispering counsel into the Khan's ear. On the other, a trembling captive, stripped of name and lineage, her fate determined by men who saw her as a coin to be spent. The cruelty lay not only in the violence, but in the cold efficiency of it all. Intimacy was never private. A woman's worth was measured not by her heart, but by her utility, her womb, her alliances, her obedience. Here, the body was both battlefield and currency. Travellers whispered of these harems with unease. Some described them as sprawling, filled with women of every nation the Horde had trampled. Others hinted at a terrifying ritualism, where the act of possession itself became a kind of ceremony, repeated endlessly, a reminder that in the Empire of the Steppe, nothing escaped the shadow of power. And the psychological toll was immense. For the captive, there was no escape. Her identity erased, her body conscripted into a lineage not her own. For the noblewoman, there was no safety, her position secure only as long as her sons thrived and her influence held. Every gaze, every whisper, every night carried the weight of political consequence. The harem was not a sanctuary. It was a court, a prison, and a theatre of power. Its curtains concealed not indulgence, but strategy, where women became weapons and intimacy was a tool of empire. And yet, the most disturbing secrets of the Golden Horde's bedrooms were not about pleasure, but about power, bloodlines, and control over life itself. Power in the Mongol world was never random, it was ritualized. And nowhere was this more evident than in their most intimate customs, acts that to outsiders seemed private, but in truth were ceremonies of empire. The steppe was a land ruled not only by warriors, but by spirits. Shamans blessed every conquest, every oath, and, most disturbingly, every union of flesh. Marriage was not a sacred covenant of love, but a binding contract, sealed with ritual and blood. When a Khan took a wife or concubine, the union was sanctified by shamanic invocations, animal sacrifice, and fertility rites designed to ensure heirs. The act itself became a performance, half spiritual, half political, reminding all that even desire must bend before the will of the empire. Chastity, paradoxically, was exalted and demanded. Noble women were expected to remain untouched until given to a Khan or prince. Yet at the very same time, sexual conquest of foreign women was glorified, an extension of military victory. This contradiction reveals the dark logic of the Golden Horde: purity at home, domination abroad, and in this cruel order, blood became everything. The ruling Borjigin clan enforced strict codes of lineage. A child born of the Khan's loins, even through a concubine, carried potential claim to power, but a child of uncertain paternity, an abomination, sometimes drowned, sometimes abandoned to the steppe. The womb itself was a political weapon, and disobedience was met with savage punishment. Accounts from travellers confirm this chilling reality. Ibn Battuta, the Moroccan wanderer, described Mongol courts where women of noble descent sat beside Khans, veiled in dignity, while foreign concubines stood behind them like shadows. Marco Polo, with uneasy fascination, wrote of sprawling harems where every woman's place was ranked, catalogued, and enforced with terrifying precision. Even death did not release them. Archaeologists uncovering burial sites have found women interred beside Mongol nobles, sometimes alive when the earth closed above them, forced to accompany their masters into eternity. The system left no room for rebellion. A concubine who resisted her role risked mutilation or execution. A noblewoman accused of infidelity risked death not only for herself, but for her children. And yet incestuous arrangements were whispered within the ruling class. Alliances kept pure by binding cousins, even siblings in unholy unions. To preserve the bloodline, they twisted it inward. This was not chaos. It was order. A chilling, bureaucratic order. Intimacy documented, regulated, punished. The tent of the Khan was less a home than a court of law, where bedsheets bore witness to dynastic claims, and where the failure to produce heirs could mean ruin or death. Think of the psychological toll. A concubine was not merely a captive, she was livestock, her value measured in fertility. Every pregnancy watched, every birth recorded, every child judged against the empire's needs. For some, motherhood brought elevation, even influence. For others, it meant only further chains, children taken from them, raised as Mongols, severed from their mother's people forever. And yet, despite this obsession with blood purity, the Mongols could not escape their contradictions. They demanded chastity within their clan, yet they gloried in spreading their seed among the conquered. They exalted noble women as untouchable, yet exposed foreign women to ritualized violation. They proclaimed the sanctity of the bloodline, yet practiced incest in the name of purity. This was the paradox of their empire: to sanctify control even in the most private of acts, to weave domination into the very fabric of intimacy. The cruelty was not only in the violence, but in its systemic precision. And still, the legacy of these customs did not end with the Horde. Children born of these unions carried Mongol blood into Europe, the Middle East, and beyond. Dynasties rose and fell on the strength of these unions, and entire peoples bore the psychological scars of generations marked by domination. But the Mongols' darkest sexual legacy was not written in the silks of their tents. It was carved into the bloodline of empires for centuries to come. History remembers empires by their monuments, walls of stone, palaces of marble, chronicles etched in ink. But the Mongol Golden Horde left another legacy, carved not in cities, but in blood. A legacy that still breathes, silently, in the veins of millions across Eurasia. For where their horses thundered, children followed. Entire populations reshaped, villages repopulated with faces that bore the stamp of Mongol lineage. Across Russia, the Middle East, and even the distant edges of Europe, whispers spread of the Mongols' terrifying virility. Some saw it as proof of divine favour, others as a curse that could never be erased. To the victors, this was power immortalised. To the conquered, it was memory, pain passed down through generations, scars etched deeper than any sword could carve. Yet within this darkness, there were paradoxes. Some women taken as slaves rose to astonishing heights, their sons becoming generals, governors, even Khans themselves. A concubine from the Caucasus might find her child elevated to nobility, her humiliation transformed, on paper at least, into prestige. But for every woman remembered, countless others vanished into silence, their names erased, their voices smothered by the endless wind of the steppe. The Empire had used intimacy as a weapon, and weapons always leave ruins. Communities fractured, lineages warped, families torn apart not only by death, but by forced assimilation. To be born of a Mongol father and a captive mother was to carry both privilege and stigma. Privilege within the Empire, stigma beyond it. Such children stood as living reminders of conquest, both exalted and despised, and the psychological toll did not fade. For the women of the Golden Horde's dominion, the bed had been transformed into another battlefield. Their bodies became extensions of empire, their wombs turned into dynastic frontiers. The silence surrounding their suffering was not absence, it was the heaviest weight of all. Travellers of the time recorded the grandeur of Mongol courts, the gold, the silks, the unbroken lines of cavalry. Few dared write of what those courts were built upon, and so the darker truth slipped into shadows, leaving us fragments only, bones unearthed in mass graves, rumours whispered through folklore, traces of genetic legacy that still astonish scientists today. The moral question presses upon us now. Was this aberration or inevitability? Did the Mongols merely push to extremes what other empires practiced quietly? Or does their story remind us of a universal danger, that when power becomes absolute, even intimacy can be weaponized? We like to imagine that history's horrors are safely behind us, locked in the past. But the story of the Golden Horde is not a relic, it is a warning. A warning of how empires consume not only land but people, not only wealth, but the private sanctity of the human soul. Because here lies the haunting truth. The Mongols' sexual customs were not accidents of cruelty, not lapses in discipline. They were deliberate, they were systemic, they were empire itself, extending its shadow into the most private corners of human life. And if we listen closely, we can still hear the echoes today. In fractured identities, in whispered legends, in the unspoken wounds of entire peoples. The empire has long since vanished into dust, but its shadows endure. If this journey into the shadows of the Golden Horde has unsettled you, subscribe. Because history's darkest truths are the ones most often buried. The story of the Golden Horde should not be remembered merely for its cavalry charges or its glittering palaces. It should be remembered for what it reveals about civilization itself. That beneath banners and thrones lies a darker battlefield. One where power reaches into the home, the marriage bed, the body itself. And so we close not with triumph, but with warning. The Mongol Golden Horde's sexual customs were not aberrations. They were messages, carved into history's flesh. Messages reminding us that empires do not end at their borders. They invade bloodlines. They colonize silence. They haunt the very core of human identity. And long after the riders vanished from the steppe, their shadow still lingers.